so let's, thank you. I usually have someone introduce me and I just been kind of going, I don't think, well, thank you guys for coming. Yeah, can tell, yeah.
Everyone give a round of applause to Spike Cohen.
Oh my God, wow, thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming. Oh, please stop, thank you. This speech is actually going to be relatively short because I'd actually like to have an opportunity for you guys to ask any questions you have. I'm sure you all hear enough people talking at you all day long, so I don't want to add much more to that than I have to. I just want to take stock of where we are right now. Now, I don't live in New York, so you know better than I do where we are, but I think it's so important to talk about it. Right now, we're just outside of an area in New York City where if you're not vaccinated, you are essentially a third-class member of that society now. And it doesn't matter why if you're not vaccinated. You could be unvaccinated because of a religious reason or because of a medical reason. I actually am unvaccinated for medical reasons. You could just choose not to get vaccinated. Whatever your reason is, even if it's one that's not fully under your control, you can't go to a restaurant, you can't go to a gym, very likely soon you won't be able to go to a store. You can't work almost anywhere, and that's national. That if you work for a large business, which includes most chain stores, you can't get a job, or you can't keep your job. This is because of people who are very scared, who are allowing politicians to tell us how to live our lives, just for now, until we get COVID under control. You know, just a temporary thing. We have to realize two things. Number one, we have to realize COVID's not going anywhere. COVID is endemic. COVID is so widespread that the era of COVID waves is going to become as permanent as cold and flu season. It doesn't matter. As soon as we knew that the vaccine didn't stop people from getting or spreading COVID, that was that. That's the end of that. COVID shots are like flu shots. They're likely to keep you from getting sick, but they're also still likely to get it and spread it even if you have the shot. Which means that this isn't going anywhere. So we have to decide, is this how we want to live? These are not temporary measures. They're not just until we get over this hump. The humps are going to keep continuing. COVID waves are here. But we also have to remember why so many of our fellow, your fellow New Yorkers and our fellow Americans are okay with all of this. Because as libertarians, or liberty-leaning people, we tend not to think the same way as most other people. We look at things in terms of our rights and our livelihoods and looking at not seeing government as a way to keep us safe. So we're instantly skeptical. Most people aren't. If they're told that something will keep them safe, they typically believe it. All evidence to the contrary. So what got us here? Early last year, I got very sick in February. That's not what got us here, but early last year in February, I got sick. And, well, maybe it's part of what got us here. And I went to a doctor, and this is when we were first hearing about COVID. Back then they were just calling it coronavirus. And I said, Doc, I think I might be sick with this coronavirus thing. And they tested me for the flu, and I tested negative. And I said, so do you think it's coronavirus? And she said, we have no way of knowing. There's no testing. And in that moment, I knew that it was already here, and it was already very widespread, because it meant that if people were getting sick, and it was likely they had COVID, there was still no way of knowing or tracking it. So at that time, I thought, oh, okay, so not only is it likely I might have COVID, or coronavirus at the time, but it means that it's already spreading wildly out of control, and we won't know until they start allowing testing. Turns out, testing was actually banned during that time. The CDC did not allow testing. So the few cases we heard about in January and February were tests that were done illegally that we weren't supposed to know about. That allowed COVID to spread wildly out of control with no hope of trying to contain it or slow its spread or anything else. It was all over the place. And that set the stage for the next thing to happen. And we saw that here as well. Once we realized COVID was here, we had some governors, including your former governor, Governor Cuomo, who, in response to it, in order to try to alleviate the strain on emergency services and ICU, he ordered for COVID patients to be put in nursing homes and disability homes. Now keep in mind, COVID is most likely to kill people who are older and have other comorbidities. In other words, he was ordering for COVID patients to be put in with the people who were the most likely to die of COVID. And that's why in end of February, beginning of March, we went from wondering if COVID was even here to knowing that there were tens or hundreds of thousands of cases and thousands of people dying from it. That created the baseline of fear that allowed for politicians to push for all of the things that we would have otherwise never accepted. Not just us, we're not going to accept any of this, but everyday normal people were not going to accept it unless they were afraid that they and or their closest loved ones were moments from death unless someone did something. So what happened? Next, we had the lockdowns. We had the government tell people whether or not they were essential, whether or not they were allowed to go outside, whether or not they were allowed to work to provide for their family, whether or not they were allowed to operate their small business. Because of course, operating your small business, if 5 or 6 people are in your small business, that's very unsafe. Thousands of people at Costco or Walmart or a big box store, that's perfectly fine, that's safe. But your furniture store or your tanning salon, that's a problem. None of this makes any sense. It never was demonstrated to stop or slow the spread of COVID, but it was security and safety theater, and it made the average person feel like, well, at least they're doing something. I heard that multiple times last year, when I would explain to people how this wasn't working, and it's just making everything worse. And a good number of them would say, but at least they're doing something. And that's the importance of safety theater and security theater, is the idea that, well, if we weren't doing this, it would be way worse. Again, all evidence to the contrary. Well, the lockdowns didn't work. COVID slowed down on its own because it was a COVID wave, like it was the first COVID wave. Then we had a second COVID wave at the end of last year, beginning of this year. And they said, well, that's okay because now we have vaccines. And they rolled out the vaccines. And there was that COVID wave ended, so many people thought that that was because of the vaccines. And sadly, it wasn't. I wish I had been wrong. I wish I had been wrong and that the COVID vaccine completely put COVID out of existence. But then we had the wave of earlier this year. That took a couple of months to go through. And so now, we went from, oh, thank goodness, the vaccine saved us, to, oh, the vaccine's not stopping this, we all have to get vaccinated now. Now again, that makes no sense, but at least they're doing something. And that's the problem. That's the overriding theme here, is that the average American just wants to feel like something's being done. And what government is doing is they've laid down the groundwork through their own actions and inactions to make everyone so scared that they'll accept anything, especially if they can try to convince them that it's temporary. Because anyone can take something for a short period of time. It's important for us to let people know this isn't going away. And this is actually an important realization I had in my own life a few years ago. When I was first told I had multiple sclerosis, I spent the better part of a year trying to figure out how to fix it and cure it or deny it. I can't have MS. MS is for people that are in wheelchairs. That can't be me. I'm going to figure out what's really wrong here. And I stressed myself out for an incredibly long period of time in denial. It was when I finally accepted, you have this, it's not going away until there's some cure in the future or something, it's not going away. Now, how are you going to live your life? That I was able to actually reclaim my life. It's why I'm here now, and I'm grateful that I had that experience. America now has to have that experience. Because until we have that experience of saying, this isn't going away, it's something we're going to have to deal with, what do we want the rest of our lives to look like? This is just going to keep getting worse, folks. Now, we just saw election results, which I believe was largely the population rejecting lockdowns, rejecting vaccine mandates, rejecting the idea that parents don't control or shouldn't control what their children are learning. But I also know where that puts us, where we're going to be next. I actually used to be a young Republican. I know that the young Republicans are who invited me to be here. And as someone who's now neither young nor a Republican, I'm now a poorly aging Libertarian. And as a former young Republican, I'm going to tell you where this red wave is going to lead you. Disappointment. And here's why. You're going to have that glow of celebration. We won them. We beat them. And then they're going to come in and they're going to largely do what the Democrats did. Maybe a little bit better on some things, maybe a little bit worse on other things, largely overall the same thing. And they're going to tell you it's because of the Democrats. And you're going to say, well, wait a second, you have control over your own body. You can decide whether or not you want to sign something. And they'll go, yeah, but the Democrats. And you're going to experience what Democrats have been experiencing for the last 11 months. After the glow of victory is over, now comes the disappointment. Wait a second, you said that you were going to defund the police and you tripled funding for the police. Wait a second, you said that you were going to introduce Medicare for all, and instead it looks like you're keeping the status quo. Wait a second, I thought that we were going to get stimmy funding, and we haven't gotten a single check since you got into office. And Joe Biden says, yes, but the Republicans. This is a good cop, bad cop routine, folks, and it never ends. So what I encourage you to do is, first of all, we need to have real conversations with people about the fact that this isn't going away. And that we have to decide how we want to live our lives. The next thing that I encourage you to do is, and I say this, I'm a partisan libertarian. Stop caring about the letter next to someone's name, R, D, or L for that matter. Vote for people whose principles are libertarian principles, liberty-minded principles, smaller government, less regulation of our lives, less control of our lives, less taxes, more control and power and freedom and money in your hands. That's what we need to vote for and support. And the last thing we need to do, and this is something every person has to make this choice for themselves, what their line is and what they're willing to tolerate or not tolerate, but the more we resist, the more we refuse to comply, the harder it becomes for them to functionally keep doing this to us. It doesn't even take many of us, 1%, 2%, 3% of the population refusing to comply. The enforcers of government make up less than 1% of the population. If even 1 or 2% of us don't comply, they can't make us. Look at Australia right now. They have a fairly large police state, close to 2% of their population. They have a few hundred people refusing to comply, and they're in disarray, trying to enforce it in some parts of the country. Mass non-compliance leads to effective quitting by the people in government. They can't do it. So I will leave you with that. And with that, I will open the floor up to any questions that anyone has. Ray?
Yeah, I think most people understand that the laws and mandates that have been put in place for the lockdowns are unconstitutional, but they think they're justified. I'm wondering why didn't deadly diseases like coronavirus exist at the time that the Constitution was written?
Yes. In fact, it's interesting because one of the things that many people will point to is either shortly before or shortly after the founding of the U.S., they actually did institute some quarantines for, I believe, smallpox. But quarantine meant quarantining the sick. The lockdowns were quarantining the healthy. And here's a pipeline to go down. It was under the George W. Bush presidency that this regime of lockdown guidelines was created in 2005. And it was created in response to the avian flu and the threat that the avian flu would cross the barrier into spreading from human to human and not just spreading very rarely from bird to human and only with very close contact. Bird flu, avian flu, has a fatality rate of somewhere between 60 and 80%. Whereas COVID, at no point did anyone think COVID's fatality rate was anything more than 10% at the highest, and we now know it's at or less than 1%. We are using a lockdown regime that was put in place by the Bush administration, Never miss an opportunity to bash Bush, by the way. It was put in place by the Bush administration to deal with a virus that had a fatality rate of as much as 80 times more deadly as this disease, where you were likely to die if you got it, regardless of your age, your health, anything else. Now, maybe the fatality rate would have ended up being lower. There were very rare cases, they didn't really know how to treat it, but let's say it was 30%. That's 30 times higher than this virus. And we are treating this as though it were avian flu. Now, here's the thing. If this virus had that kind of fatality rate, it's likely none of us would be here right now. We'd be doing this by Zoom, and it's likely you wouldn't have to tell people to, wear masks or get vaccinated if a vaccine was available, because the cost-benefit analysis there is that the vast majority of people are going to go, if I'm 1 in 3 or 1 in, a half likely to die from this thing, and it's spreading as easily as it is, then I probably will, be a little bit more careful in my behavior. So even then, a lockdown wouldn't be necessary. To go back to your question about the Constitution, most people don't care about the Constitution, and that's very unfortunate. In fact, most people who say they care about the Constitution don't actually care about the Constitution. Here's the thing. This is why a lot of libertarians get angry at me, because I don't talk about constitutionality, and I often don't even talk about natural rights when I'm talking to people. I talk about whether something works or not, because it doesn't work. Something that is going to violate people's lives and rights and property makes things worse. So I focus on that. And people say, why don't you focus on the fact that it's a violation of someone's rights? And I said, because you already know that, and no one else cares. If they think that it works, they don't care if it violates their rights. When we tell people that taxation is theft, they go, okay, but how do we fund the roads? And we get angry. Well, but to them, okay, great. If theft is necessary for us to have roads and bridges and parks and schools and libraries and police and firefighters, then I guess we're all going to have to get robbed. That's how most people think. So we have to talk to them on their terms. I talk about the fact that the lockdowns didn't work. I talk about the fact that these vaccine mandates aren't working. I talk about the fact that countries that didn't implement mandates are actually seeing higher rates of vaccination because they're not creating this political division over it. They're not threatening people. They're just telling people the facts about it and letting them make their own choice. I focus on the consequence of it because that's what most people actually care about. I wish they did, but that's the reality. Normies care about whether they think it works or not. It doesn't work, so why are we arguing with it? Does anyone else have a question? You said you had a question. I already answered your question in my speech. That's what happened.
How can local counties and governments help, project more freedom into the states and into national?
Now, are you saying elected officials or like parties and
I'm
people?
sorry, I don't mean elected officials, just like an organization like us and just people in general. How can they fight what's going on throughout the country? Because we have, unfortunately, luckily Nassau County has gotten rid of a lot of the mandates and stuff a while back. But the big thing here is the school masking. There's been rallies all year, and I've been part of them. I've met some kids at schools, getting them to, and I've seen you go to meetings and stuff like that, talking about this. How can we fight that in the local school districts? Take that to the county level, and then so on and so forth.
So politics is all about, in fact, the root word, the root prefix of politics is pol, which is people. You have to have people. Now, we have the best ideas. Libertarians and liberty-leaning people, we get it, we have the best ideas. We often don't have the numbers. So, if you are trying to affect change in your local community, whether it's on what's going on in the schools, what's going on in the city, or especially if you want to try to build a coalition that can then take things on at the state or national level, it is imperative that you find allies. And allies aren't going to agree with you on everything, and that's perfectly fine. You're allied on this, and you're building a rapport with them so that they hear your other ideas in the future, and hopefully you can work on more things. So the long story short is get involved. It sounds like you're already doing that. Do what you're doing, basically. Find people who already agree with you on something that you want to fight against or for in your area. So people that are pro-Second Amendment, people that are pro-gun rights. people that are in favor of ending these mask mandates, people that are in favor of fighting against vaccine mandates, people that are, because many of the anti-lockdown groups from last year, they're still together ready to fight against another lockdown, and they're also fighting all these other mandates as well. We can build coalitions with these people. You might not agree with someone who's a Second Amendment person on foreign policy. That's fine. You might not agree with someone that you work with on criminal justice reform or police reform on healthcare. That's fine. You might not agree with someone you're working with on mask mandates about immigration. That's fine. Work with them on the thing that you agree with them on. And the more you can work together, and the more you can build coalitions, and to establish yourself as a leader who creates coalitions within that. So you might find some, anti-mask mandate people over here and some anti-mask mandate people over here who either aren't connected or they have some kind of thing that they disagree over, and you can be that conduit that they work together with. That establishes you as a leader in your community in fighting for and against the things that we're fighting for and against. And when you do that, you now have the numbers, you're leveraging the support that already exists for or against that thing on your side. And then from there, you can build a coalition and fight more and bigger things moving forward from there. And that's what all of us have to do. That's what, as libertarians and as liberty-leaning people, that's what we have to do. We have to grow this from the grassroots up. This era of for the last 50 years, we put up presidential candidates, and we wait for them to get on the debate stage, which they don't. And we wait for them to get elected president, which they don't. And then we're certain that once that happens, they're going to trickle down freedom to the rest of us. Well, not only has that not worked, and not only is it never going to work, but it's not even what we believe. We believe that things happen in a voluntary, grassroots, decentralized way. That's how good organizations are built. So let's act like it. Let's do it that way. Any other questions? You have a question?
Oh, yes. Retouching on what you were saying about how Democrats, they blame everything on Republicans why they don't get their agenda passed, or Republicans blame everything on Democrats why they don't get their agenda passed. Could you touch on why that happens? We know all see it happens, but what's going on behind the scenes that causes that?
So when it's time to raise the debt ceiling, that happens in record speed. When it's time to hand off trillions of dollars, to print out trillions of dollars, and hand it off to the crony billionaire corporations that bankroll both of them and both of their parties into office, and stick us with the bill for all of that, that happens in record time, in a broad bipartisan manner. And it's interesting in the media that the idea that bipartisan equals good, that if you can get Democrats and Republicans to agree, that's good. Of course, we know that it's almost always bad. If you can get a bunch of politicians in DC to agree on something, it's almost certainly a terrible thing. Usually, not always. The reason that they pretend to fight on stuff is because that's called good cop, bad cop. So if you and I are in a room and we're trying to get this guy over here to confess to something, and he comes in, and I come in and I go, you SOB, I don't know if I'm cussing. You son of a biscuit-eating bulldog, I'm going to ruin you. I'm going to put you in prison, and we're going to throw the book at you. And you'll be lucky if I don't beat the crap out of you on the way out. And then I walk out, and you come in and go, hey, pal, listen, Spike is crazy, okay? He doesn't care if he gets in trouble. He doesn't care if he goes to jail. He'll come back and beat you up again. I just watched casinos and I'm doing that. He's a rough customer. I'm trying to help you out here. Before he comes in, just confess to this because, listen, we'll try to work something out. That's good cop, bad cop. Now, we're both cops. And we already knew we were going to do that. Now, they play a version of good cop, bad cop where they actually are both the good cop and bad cop. The Republicans play good cop to their base, and the Democrats play good cop to their base. More importantly, they play bad cop to the other base. Now, have you ever watched Trump or Biden or AOC or, I don't know, Mitt Romney or any of the rest of these people, and they'll do stuff and you'll think, why would they do that? Don't they know they're like pissing off half the country with the way that they're acting? Yes, that's intentional. Here's why. How many people last year voted for Joe Biden? Because at least he wasn't Donald Trump. Yes, I know he's going to betray us. Yes, I know he's the architect of half the crap that Trump was doing. And, yes, I know he built the cages. But he's not Trump. I can't stand Trump. How many people voted for Trump or for other Republicans? Because yes, I know they said that they were going to cut spending in the deficit and said they increased the debt by $7 trillion in one term, which is actually a record. And I know that they said they were going to protect the Second Amendment, and instead they introduced more gun control and accessory control than the Obama and Clinton administrations combined. But I can't stand Joe Biden. Joe Biden and the radical left, which I love that they're calling it radical left. Anyway, Joe Biden and the radical left are going to take over this country. They're going to destroy everything. This is the game they play, because then you have to vote for the lesser evil. And then when I show up and I go, hey, they're both wrong, they're both hypocrites, look at what they're doing to you, you go, well, yeah, I know, and your ideas make the most sense, but if I vote for you, the worser evil might win. I'm throwing my vote away. You're throwing your vote away if you vote for the people who helped create this mess in the first place, and every 4 years, 2 years, 6 years, whatever their term is, they promise that they're going to fix it this time. And you know that they're not. You know they're just going to blame it on the other side, and you know the other side's going to do the same thing. That's throwing your vote away. Even if they're likely to win, whatever that means, it means they win. What did you win? So it is. It's good cop, bad cop. And the scam only works. All con games, typically, all scams and con games only work as long as you allow yourself to be scammed and conned by them. The second you say, no, I'm not doing that anymore. I'm going to vote for Libertarians, or I'm going to vote Green, or I'm going to vote Independent, or I'm not going to vote at all. However you decide not to participate in your thing anymore, then enough of us do that, and it's over. And we can actually put people in office who will roll back what they've done and take all the power that they've taken from you and put it back in your hand and work along.
That may actually have forced the other parties to do the right thing.
If for no other reason than to keep themselves in office, absolutely. And I think you had a question.
Yeah, so, given that, like, the role of government, unless you're more anarcho-capitalist and, you know, the ideal
Yes.
society would be just, you know, everything voluntary.
Right.
If the role of government is to protect third parties, you know, like, you know, providing courts of law and things like that,
Yeah.
where do you draw a line on that for a vaccine mandate? Meaning, like, say this wasn't coronavirus, like, say it was like Ebola, where it was like, you know, it was a lot of people are going to die. It's a very bad virus.
Right.
Do you believe, like, how would you warrant having like a vaccine mandate in that sense to like stop it? Do you think the government has a role then to step in for a vaccine mandate if it's to protect, you know, the country?
If this was much more
If it
dense.
was much, you know,
Yeah.
not that, you know, if after this is all said and done, you know,
Yeah.
99.9% of us are going to be alive.
So there's two questions there. One is the, I guess, philosophical question of the role of government in that, and then there's also the utilitarian question of how well that would work or if it would even be necessary.
Yeah.
So first of all, I am an anarcho-capitalist, just full disclosure. I will say this, if we are to have a government, and if it is to have any semblance of legitimacy, it needs to have the consent of the government, or at least the overwhelming consent of the government. You can't have 100% consent, which is why I'm an anarcho-capitalist. But also, it needs to exist only to protect the lives, rights, and property of the people. As an anarcho-capitalist, I argue that its existence violates that. Again, if we, I'm doing the counter argument here. So its existence should be to protect lives, rights, and property. Now, your argument might be, or someone else's argument might be, well, but then wouldn't that be necessary for a vaccine? Wouldn't, if this is a communicable illness that, you know, kills more people than it doesn't kill, then wouldn't it be incumbent on government to force people to get it because they're protecting lives and rights against the actions of others? I would say that the line there would be that I would still say no, and here's why. Government can stop me from intentionally doing something to you. So for example, if I know that I have even COVID, and I go around and I'm coughing on people, then yeah, I would argue that government, if I know that I have something, then government has a right to, or government has a just power, I would argue, or in a free market society, whoever is, you know, enforcing private law there would have a just power to stop me from doing that, because I'm actively doing something. That's different than the possibility that I might have something, and that this has a likelihood of or a reduction of my having it and spreading it. You're now dealing with gray areas that make it where it's not protecting lives from someone's bad actions. It's telling us what we should do in order to prevent, a bad thing from happening. And you can keep extrapolating that out. You can keep extrapolating it out to, telling people what they can and can't eat, or telling them whether or not they're allowed to smoke, or, because go further out. If you're a parent who's making bad food choices, then that means that you're harming yourself and your kids both directly and indirectly, because if you die now, what's going to happen to your kids? You can just keep going down that line. There has to be a clear line. That's the philosophical end of it. The utilitarian end of it is, if going back to, let's say that there were a virus that was as deadly as bird flu and spread as easily as COVID. Almost everyone would be vaccinated. I would probably be vaccinated.
It's like the market with that, it's beneficial for the people. It's because
Yes.
trying to talk to people like outside of the Liberty area where it's like, well, what do they just assume it's like, oh, everyone's like an anarchist, and it's not. Even if you do have those, beliefs and like the ideal society, it's like, no, well, we still have a government, we have to govern people.
Right.
It's the reality of it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like talking to them, it's like, well, what do you think the government's role is? It's like, well, to protect third parties. Then it's like, well, isn't that protecting people against the vax? So it's like, but.
And there are even some libertarians who say that. The libertarians who are in favor of vaccine mandates are using that justification, that if a government is to exist, it should be protecting the people against harm, and that this protects people against harm. To which I say, if there is a sizable percentage of the population who, well, first of all, we know that the vaccination isn't stopping people from getting it, which means that your likelihood of getting it or spreading it is not all that affected by vaccination levels. What's affected is how likely you are to get sick or die from something, which means it's a personal health choice. Now, again, if, this is total hypothetical, if we have the terrible illness that spreads like COVID and kills like avian flu, and we had a vaccine that almost assured that you wouldn't get it or spread it, which means not only is it a personal health choice, but it's a public health choice as well, everyone would be getting it. Almost everyone would be getting it. Such a small percentage of people wouldn't be getting it, and you wouldn't need government to say you have to get vaccinated. You'd have people's friends saying, I want to know you're vaccinated or I don't want to be around you. And not just because of my safety, but because I'm worried about safety. But the market would handle this largely. And the market, I don't even like saying the market, because when you say that to average people, they think like a supermarket.
Yeah.
The people would largely make good health choices. And in an attempt to try to stop that small group of people from making their own choices for themselves would likely just make them, dive down even further and double down on not doing it. Because, requiring something doesn't make it happen. It just criminalizes not doing it. So it wouldn't solve the problem in the first place. I think you had your hand first, and then I'll go to you.
Do you have anything to say to people who believe that the unvaccinated should die?
Yes, they should not be the chair of the Manhattan Libertarian Party.
My thing is on top of that, that government can give out information. They don't have to force this on you, but they
Absolutely.
can give you that information, and when, like you said, people will see that maybe disease is killing 80%, has an 80%, 90% kill rate, that will naturally make people do things on their own without mandates to get vaccinated and stuff like that. Like if I saw that, I would probably do that. I'm not vaccinated, but should I say that?
I'm not sure.
You sign something, you're all right.
This is a COVID-free zone, so there's a sign right there, no COVID.
Okay.
Yeah, or at least not like assault COVID.
But as I was saying, I would get it if I knew that they actually did kill 90%, rate. But that's based on information, and I think people naturally will do that. You don't need government to force people to make those good decisions. I mean, maybe some people have less faith in human society, but I have faith in society to do the right thing without government.
The vast majority of people would do it, and the ones who wouldn't, no ban or requirement is going to do anything other than criminalize them. It's not going to actually fix the problem. And last year, if we had that kind of virus last year, we wouldn't have had to have lockdowns. People would have stayed home. We probably would have stopped the spread because everyone would have been scared to go outside for a sufficient number of weeks to make it so contained that they could have actually possibly stopped it. But it requires people actually, again, even with the lockdowns, people were disobeying the lockdowns. They were just risking trouble for doing it, which means it wasn't doing anything to stop the spread. We were, yeah, I mean, most of us were. I did multiple illegal events. Now, they were mostly outdoors, and they were also, we did them in safe conditions, but, I mean, they weren't giving out permits for any kind of public events in multiple states, so we just did them, because the First Amendment says we can. So, you know, that is, the people are going to make their own choices. They're largely going to be good ones, and the ones who make the bad ones, a ban, criminal action against them isn't going to do anything to stop it. And you're telling me you're doing this, which means I now have to finish. But I will end with this. I really appreciate everyone coming out and listening to this. We often wait for the person that's going to bring liberty to our community, to our country, to our world. You're that person. That's you. You're going to do that. You're going to do that by building connections in your communities. You're going to do that by building coalitions. You're going to do that by talking with people in your social circles and in your social networks and so forth. That's how we're going to spread liberty. It's going to be the way we believe things happen, in a decentralized, grassroots way, with people who voluntarily sign on to these things. And when that happens, we're going to be free. Liberty is going to win because we have the best ideas. And when that happens, it's going to be because of you and the work that people like you are doing across this country. And I thank you for it in advance, because I know half of you are already doing it now. The other half are inspired to do it just because I said it. So thank you guys again for having me. I really appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you.
I actually have one more question. But,
Sure.
Anyway, a lot of people in our coalition are single-issue voters. Like, they just don't like gun control,
Yep.
or they just are against vaccine mandates.
Yes.
How do we kind of stitch them into the larger coalition?
I think if they truly are just that, you may only be able to work with them on just that. And every individual, I mean, I can tell you something. When I first came to the Liberty Movement, it was largely on opposition to the wars and deregulation that would help small business. I was a small business owner. On immigration, I didn't really agree with most libertarians on immigration. And gun control, drug policy, even when I was a conservative, I was a pro-drug legalization, anti-gun control conservative. But there were more than a few issues, like, you know, the police reform stuff and the criminal justice reform stuff. I'm like, why are we making things easy for criminals? It took a while of me interacting with libertarians and then doing more research on my own to realize I was wrong about those things, that I wasn't being consistent. So that's going to be on an individual basis. I think the most important thing is that you always have a space for people who just agree with you on that.
All right.
And over time, many or most of them are going to work their way over, but that has to be their own individual process. You're not going to be able to successfully take this entire only pro-Second Amendment group and force them into this larger libertarian ecosphere. You've just got to kind of allow that pipeline to exist and have that space there for them to, because if nothing else, you can at least work with them on that. If they're a terrible statist on literally everything else, but you can work with them on this, great. And if you can bring them down the pipeline over time, then that's good too, but that's a personal journey. So.
All right, that's good.
So.
I ask because there's a lot of really good energy around the anti-mandate stuff happening, and a lot of the people who are on the anti-mandate bandwagon are people who traditionally wouldn't agree with us. Like, I met some liberals who are anti-mandate, and, you know, just get that, I think to bring that energy into kind of the right side of the equation, the liberty side of the equation would be beneficial in the future.
Yeah, no, I watch Trump Republicans who are telling me, I think it's ridiculous. I mean, can you imagine a system where the government tells you that you can't go into an area or cross a line because you don't have documentation? And I'm like, that's a nightmare. I can't imagine that. But then they'll turn right around and that's fine for immigrants. Like, that's completely different because it doesn't affect them.
Yeah.
But I may only be able to work with them on anti-mandate stuff. I'm fine with that. If we can work together on that, we can get a lot of stuff accomplished, and some of them I can maybe move over my way, but maybe not. That might not happen, and that's fine. If nothing else, that's an effective ally I can work with on that. And that's why I tell libertarians, we're very much about purity and how libertarian are you. That's why people tend to like me, because I am the perfect libertarian. But the super sane libertarian. And but what I say is, you're going to have to work with people that you disagree with on more things than you agree with. if you would both agree solidly on this and are willing to do the work together on this, you may never agree on anything else. They might, you're gonna meet some hardcore, right now, you know why you're not hearing about Black Lives Matter in the media right now? Because they're out protesting vaccine mandates. That's why they disappeared. They haven't disappeared, they're still out protesting, but now they're protesting something that the media doesn't want them to be talking about. Okay? It was fine for them to be talking about police reform as long as the media could just make it a racial wedge for everyone to yell at each other about and drive up ratings. But now that they're talking about something that they are trying to push, now Black Lives Matter doesn't exist. They went away somewhere. You may find yourself working with Black Lives Matter types on vaccine mandates or on some other issue, maybe police reform, and you disagree on every single other thing in the most visceral terms. If you can work together successfully on that, good, then do that. I think it's very important. I mean, there are some lines to draw. I'm not going to work with Nazis because we agree on like cutting taxes or something. But like, but you know, there are definitely lines. But I think generally speaking, outside of those extremes, like a tanky Stalinist communist or something, or a Nazi, for the most part, I'm willing to work with just about anyone if we agree solidly on that thing and they're willing to work just as hard as I am on that.
You can still talk to them and maybe change their minds. I mean, look at
Here's why you shouldn't be a Nazi.
Look at Daryl
Part
Davis.
one.
Look at Daryl Davis.
No, but if you feel the calling to convert Nazis to libertarianism and make them not be Nazis anymore, that's perfect. No, that's fine. But like my thing is like, I don't want to have to explain to someone why I shouldn't be killed. I'm Jewish. So that's just a line for me. Like that's one of my lines. Like, I'm Jewish and I own more than one property, so that there are multiple people who think I should die for various reasons. So that's my line, but you have to have your own line. But we do unfortunately have to go.